solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I am Alistair Stevens. Tonight in session 63, we are going to continue our discussion of the Order of the Phoenix with chapters 3 and 4 with what might be best described as a sucker punch of world building, an explosive re-envisioning of what we imagine Harry Potter's wizarding world to be like. And of course, some Angry Angry Harry, which is the proposed board game version of Hungry Hungry Hippos, in which you and 3 other players all slap the top of Harry's head until he eats all the little golden snitches rolling around the game board, and also stops yelling in all caps. A lot of all caps yelling in this week's reading. It's going to be just fine, you guys. We're going to get through Angry Harry. I promise we're going to do it together. And we're going to turn, in fact, in the course of tonight's reading, to Hermione and to Ron, to Fred and George to a lesser extent, and of course to the wonderful Ginny, who give us a perspective on what Harry is expressing right now. Not perhaps the core reasons behind it. We discussed that a little bit in last week's reading, but we're going to get the refusal of the narrative to condone Harry's newfound anger and his newfound desire for, affection for, predilection toward violence. There are a couple of very quiet and very soft references in the course of tonight's reading, which are disquieting. More on those perhaps later. Let's begin though with chapter 3, The Advanced Guard. We're going to get into Harry's recap here. Before we get to Harry's recap, in fact, just a quick bit of clarification here. Advanced Guard is technically correct, right? The Advance Guard is a cadre of people who are a unit or a group of people who are leading the way in advance of the main body of an army, right? They are the vanguard, if you like. They're guarding them from ambushes, they're surveying and scouting the landscape, right? That is, in military parlance, what an advance guard is for. Advanced guard, with the D on the end there, is not incorrect. That is actually an acceptable alternate bit of phraseology for an advance guard, but it is very unusual, and I'm never quite sure why it is that J.K. Rowling chose to use the alternate version rather than the more conventional advance guard. It's not British English. I think that generally speaking, when something crops up in Harry Potter that we're unsure of, if there's a bit of grammatical work or a bit of lexicographic work that we want to question, oftentimes we'll just resolve to chalk it up to British English and move on with our lives. But this is not conventional British English either, so I'm not entirely sure why it is an advanced guard rather than an advance guard. I don't think it's terribly important. Indeed, they're not going to be referred to as the advance guard in the course of this chapter. It's all fine. Let's get into our first slide here then with the recap from Harry. I've just been attacked by Dementors, and I might be expelled from Hogwarts. I want to know what's going on and when I am going to get out of here. Harry copied these words onto 3 separate pieces of parchment the moment he reached his desk in his dark bedroom. He addressed the first to Sirius, the second to Ron, and the third to Hermione. His owl Hedwig was off hunting. Her cage stood empty on the desk. Harry paced the bedroom waiting for her to come back, his head pounding, his brain too busy for sleep, even though his eyes stung and itched with tiredness. His back ached from carrying Dudley home, and the 2 lumps on his head where the window and Dudley had hit him were throbbing painfully. Up and down he paced, consumed with anger and frustration, grinding his teeth and clenching his fists, casting angry looks out at the empty star-strewn sky every time he passed the window. Dementors sent to get him, Mrs. Figg and Mundungus Fletcher tailing him in secret, then suspension from Hogwarts and a hearing at the Ministry of Magic, and still no one was telling him what was going on. And what had that howler been about? Whose voice has echoed so horribly, so menacingly through the kitchen? Why was he still trapped here without information? Why was everyone treating him like some naughty kid? Don't do any more magic. Stay in the house. He kicked his school trunk as he passed it. But far from relieving his anger, he felt worse, as he now had a sharp pain in his toe to deal with in addition to the pain in the rest of his body. Harry is furious. And in this instance, perhaps we might understand it. He's had a tough evening, right? Just a few short hours ago, he was laying in the garden outside the living room window listening in to the 7 o'clock news, and then after his walk and his run-in with Dudley and his run-in with the Dementors and the revelation about Arabella Figg, the revelation about Mundungus Fletcher, all of the many letters that flew back and forth hither and yon during the course of the evening, now he is alone and he has to do something with these feelings, and these feelings are perilously close to overwhelming him. I want to know what's going on and when I'm going to get out of here. He is now demanding to be brought up to speed. He doesn't want to be isolated. He doesn't want to be, protected. He's seeing this as the protection that one might afford a child, right? That this is a kind of a protection of an immature person. That's his response. Why was everyone treating him like some naughty kid? Don't do any more magic. Stay in the house. Don't do any more magic and stay in the house. By the way, excellent pieces of advice at this point. Doing any more magic is only going to exacerbate his relationship with the Ministry at this point. Leaving the house, potentially wildly dangerous, given that there are Dementors in Little Whinging right now, or at least there were Dementors in Little Whinging as recently as an hour ago. This is Harry failing to properly integrate his experience with his knowledge of the world. He is wildly opinionated at this point, and he is behaving as though he is being victimized by circumstance rather than rising to meet circumstance, as is his way, right? That has been his way, that has been his pattern through the course of the last 4 books. You remember back in Prisoner of Azkaban, back in Goblet of Fire, characters saying to Harry, hey, just chill out. Like, don't get involved in, I don't know, the kinds of plots that might make good fodder for a series of breakout YA hits, right? Like, just don't get involved with anything that seems like it might be part of a year-spanning core conflict for you, Harry Potter, the eponymous hero of this novel. And now he's finding himself cut off, of course, from his support network and cut off from his support infrastructure. And I do want to be careful as we move through this book and as we pay close attention to Harry's anger and Harry's... I'm still struggling to find a piece of language that I like for this that doesn't sound either too harsh or judgmental or provocative or weak and mealy-mouthed, right? But his predilection for violence, his comfort with violence, if you like, through the course of at least the first half of this novel is disconcerting, is disquieting. This is not the Harry that we have seen previously. Hermione, Ron, Ginny, Fred, George, Molly, even Sirius, they are all going to confirm these things as we move forward into next week's reading. But for now, we're left with a Harry who is trying to find an outlet for, well, just all of this emotion, for all of these feelings that he possesses. And we get an encapsulation of that, right? He's even been abandoned by Hedwig at this point, right? Hedwig is out hunting, something, of course, that Harry cannot do, but something that is not completely discordant with Harry's own desire at this moment. It's not the case that he went out hunting for trouble earlier in the evening, but when Dudley says goodbye to the rest of his gang, Harry absolutely hunts him. Harry absolutely provokes him, right? Remember that sequence when he's coming up and talking about Dudley's brand new and awesome nickname, Big D? This is Harry in a deliberately antagonistic position, which is, again, very much unlike the Harry Potter that we have seen up to this point. So Hedwig has abandoned him. He's pacing his bedroom, waiting for her to come back, his head pounding, his brain too busy for sleep, in those eyes stung and itched with tiredness. His back ached from carrying Dudley home, and the 2 lumps in his head from the window and where Dudley hit him were throbbing painfully. And then he delves deeper. He goes into the reasons for this. Dementors sent to get him. Mrs. Figg, Mundungus Fletcher tailing him in secret, suspension from Hogwarts, a hearing at the Ministry. And still, no one was telling him what was going on and what had that howler been about. Mysteries piled on mysteries, questions piled on questions, and Harry still here, isolated. Now, Harry is about to be very forcibly de-isolated. Harry is about to be very forcibly returned to his community, which, in the span of the first 2 and a bit chapters of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, is his expressed goal, right? That is what he wants. He wants to be returned to his world, to the wizarding world. He doesn't want to be in the Muggle world anymore. He wants that experience. But of course, when he gets that, it doesn't actually do anything to resolve his own internal conflict. The only moment of happiness that we see from Harry in this week's reading, the only moment of uncomplicated happiness that we see from Harry in this week's reading, is when he is atop his firebolt, flying away from Privet Drive. And that, it seems to me, is less about re-entering the wizarding world, and it is less about escaping the mundane realm. It is less about escaping the Muggle world, as it is the exercise of personal power. Harry is delighting in the exercise of his personal power in a way that is not, in fact, incompatible with the Harry that we have come to know through the course of the first 4 books in the series. This seems pretty damn consistent, actually, with Harry's joy in magic and joy in his own excellence. This is not something that we see from the relatively poorly academically inclined Harry Potter, but absolutely something that we see from Harry in terms of flying, right? He loves flying on his broomstick. This restoration of himself and his nature does seem to be a powerful palliative for all that he has been suffering over the course of the last 4 weeks as he has been stranded in Muggle world, but also is the exercise of power in and of itself. Let's, in fact, get to that. Let's get to the introduction of the Advanced Guard. Harry is locked in his bedroom by a rampantly odious Vernon Dursley as a consequence of a very nice bit of misdirection put in place by the Order, put in place by the advanced guard of the Order, at least. And this is the moment where we actually get to meet our rescue party. Harry stood motionless, staring through the open door at the dark upstairs landing, straining his ears for further sounds, but none came. He hesitated for a moment and then moved swiftly and silently out of his room to the head of the stairs. His heart shot upward into his throat. There were people standing in the shadowy hall below, silhouetted against the streetlight glowing through the glass door, 8 or 9 of them as far as he could see, looking up at him. "Lower your wand, boy, before you take someone's eye out," said a low, growling voice. Harry's heart was thumping uncontrollably. He knew that voice, but he did not lower his wand. "Professor Moody?" he said uncertainly. "I don't know so much about Professor," growled the voice. "Never got round to much teaching, did I? Get down here. We want to see you properly." Harry lowered his wand slightly but did not relax his grip on it, nor did he move. He had very good reason to be suspicious. He had recently spent 9 months in what he had thought was Mad-Eye Moody's company, only to find out that it wasn't Moody at all, but an imposter. An imposter, moreover, who had tried to kill Harry before being unmasked. But before he could make a decision about what to do next, a second, slightly hoarse voice floated upstairs. "It's all right, Harry. We've come to take you away." Harry's heart leapt. He knew that voice too, but he hadn't heard it for more than a year. "Professor Lupin," he said disbelievingly, "is that you?" A little bit of plot resolution here, I suppose. A little unanswered question raised by the text, but answered by a little bit of careful thought. Harry is locked in his bedroom by Vernon Dursley, right? He hears the noises downstairs long after the Dursleys has left. He heard the crash of, having a Tonks in your house, I suppose, is actually what causes that crash. Just the mere presence of Tonks causes crashes and loud noises. He hears the voices. He identifies the fact that they are probably not burglars, because burglars would be striving to keep quiet, and these people are clearly not. He's listening very intently. Nothing disturbs the silence until there is the click of the key in the lock. And the click of the key in the lock has always bothered me a little bit. Who unlocks the door? Why would someone spontaneously unlock that door in particular? How would someone know even that that door was locked? Now, there is an open question about why we don't hear the unlocking charm. Why do we not hear Alohomora at this point? But hey, we're still playing a little fast and loose about which spells have to be verbalized and which spells can be cast with the requisite flick of the wrist, and and maybe it isn't an Alohomora charm. Maybe it is instead just a little bit of telekinetic manipulation of distant objects, right? You don't generally need a key to magically unlock a lock, but the key is still in the lock outside of Harry's door. The answer, of course, is Mad-Eye Moody. Mad-Eye Moody's magical eye is capable of discerning exactly where Harry is, and probably the state of the door too. So I am perfectly comfortable now. I have resolved this question to my own satisfaction, that it is Moody that unlocks the door from the bottom of the stairs in the shadowy hall below. "Lower your wand, boy, before you take someone's eye out." Turns out that the real-life Alastor Moody is a little more concerned with basic wand safety than the Barty Crouch imitation of Alastor Moody. If only he had hit that bell a little harder, if only he had beat that drum a little more forcibly back in Goblet of Fire, then Dumbledore may have realized that something was wrong before we got to the big reveal at the end of the book. "I don't know so much about Professor. Never got around to much teaching, did I? Get down here. Do we want to see you properly?" And then we get a recapitulation of Harry's relationship with Mad-Eye Moody. And I am fascinated in the course of Order of the Phoenix with those pieces of backstory which are presented to us and those pieces of backstory which are not. We are about to be reintroduced to Ron and Hermione, and we are not going to get a gloss of who Ron and Hermione are. We're just not. And that, I think, is a product of the success of Harry Potter by the time we get to the release of Order of the Phoenix. Everyone knows Harry Potter. Like, no one is going to pick this book up without knowing Harry Potter. And if you know Harry Potter, then you know about Ron Weasley and you know about Hermione Granger. These are fixed parts of the Harry Potter mythos at this point, right? They are fixed parts of the lore, so we don't need to reintroduce them. We don't need to take that extra step to go back and kind of recapitulate that. When we get recapitulation, when we get re-encapsulation of previous events in the Harry Potter series, they are almost all from Goblet of Fire. They are almost all very recent and specific events that Harry has endured. We're talking in the chat here about Harry being an Auror, I guess. We're seeing how what Harry does after his time at Hogwarts. Harry, of course, well, I guess we're being reminded tonight not to jump the timeline too recklessly. But yes, Harry's future is interesting. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, in fact. So this is our reintroduction to our reintroduction to Alistair Mad-Eye Moody, our reintroduction most powerfully to Professor Remus Lupin, and that the leaping of his heart is actually quite beautiful in that moment. It's all right, Harry. We've come to take you away. Harry's heart leapt. He knew that voice too, though he hadn't heard it for more than a year. Let's introduce our advanced guard properly, and then we'll gloss these characters here. We are leaving, aren't we? He asked. Soon? Almost at once, said Lupin. We're just waiting for the all clear. Where are we going? The Burrow? Harry asked hopefully. Not the Burrow, no, said Lupin, motioning Harry toward the kitchen. The little knot of wizards followed, all still eyeing Harry curiously. Too risky. We've set up headquarters somewhere undetectable. It's taken a while. Mad-Eye Moody was now sitting at the kitchen table swigging from a hip flask, his magical eyes spinning in all directions, taking in the Dursleys' many labor-saving appliances. This is Alistair Moody, Harry, Lupin continued, pointing toward Moody. Yeah, I know, said Harry uncomfortably. It felt odd to be introduced to somebody he thought he'd known for a year. And this is Nymphadora. Don't call me Nymphadora, Remus, said the young witch with a shudder. It's Tonks. Nymphadora Tonks, who prefers to be known by her surname only, finished Lupin. So would you if your fool of a mother would call you Nymphadora, muttered Tonks. And this is Kingsley Shacklebolt, he indicated the tall black wizard who bowed. Ophias Doge, the wheezy-voiced wizard nodded. Daedalus Diggle, we've met before, squeaked the excitable Diggle, dropping his top hat. Emmeline Vance, a stately-looking witch in an emerald-green shawl, inclined her head. Sturgis Podmore, a square-jawed wizard with thick straw-coloured hair, winked. And Hestia Jones, a pink-cheeked, black-haired witch, waved from next to the toaster. Harry inclined his head awkwardly at each of them as they were introduced. He wished that they would look at something other than him. It was as though he had suddenly been ushered on stage. He also wondered why so many of them were there. Yeah, as Marshall says, and this is Don't Call Me Nymphadora. That's her whole name, movie version of Order of the Phoenix. Yes. And Elizabeth pointing out, okay, but Nymphadora is an amazing name. Nymphadora is an amazing name. It is not an amazing name for Tonks, I think. I can completely understand why it is that Tonks rejects the mellifluous, the euphonious name Nymphadora, the name redolent with classical antiquity and with a certain grace and beauty. I can see why Tonks rejects that. This is a brilliant bit of naming, right? We get a bunch of names here. Ophias Doge, which is perhaps... Wow, much wizard, right? It's a little different if you've been paying close attention to the internet since the publication of Order of the Phoenix and the revelation, the gift to the world of the Doge meme. Kingsley Shacklebolt is a great name. Daedalus Diggle, as it probably should be, right? Emmeline Vance, also a great name. Sturgis Podmore, Hestia Jones. These are all very good names. These are all solid J.K. Rowling, like wizarding names. I'm into all of them. None of them touch Nymphadora Tonks. Nymphadora Tonks is the perfect combination of that grace and that elegance and that hard consonantive kind of punch of a surname. It's a very good piece of naming is the thing. I have said previously that I'm a big fan of Tonks. I want to call her by her full name just because it is so good, right? I want to, just because of my pleasure in words, I want to lean into the idea of calling her Nymphadora Tonks. But out of respect for this fictional character, I will try to preserve just her surname for reference here. I adore Tonks. I love her introduction. I love how punchy and how feisty she is. I wanted to pull more slides from this section, but it would have just been a little heavy. It would have been a little much, but I want to think about Tonks as we move forward as, well, as something of an... I want to hesitate. I don't want to overstate this is the thing. So I'm kind of reining in my language here, but I want to think, and I want to encourage you to think of Tonks as something of an analog for Harry himself. Tonks is not brilliantly well informed, right? Tonks is not in a position of senior authority. Tonks is not polished and capable and worldly and suave. Tonks is, well, kind of a mess, but she's a fireball. She's a spit of fierce joy in the world, and in that way, not entirely dissimilar to Harry himself. Tonks is a great POV character, right? If we were retelling this story, if this was not the beginning of Order of the Phoenix, if this was not the beginning of the fifth book in the Harry Potter series, and this was instead the beginning of a new fantasy series where a boy is snatched up from his suburban home and drawn into a wizarding world, if this was the first Harry Potter book, right, Tonks would be the figure upon which we imprint. I think the figure upon which Harry, our reluctant muggle protagonist, would imprint at this point. So I want to observe that connection between Tonks and Harry, that resonance between Tonks and Harry, and kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. It does get us into some complicated things vis-a-vis the relationship between Tonks and Lupin, I suppose, but not wildly inappropriate things, right? There is an intimacy there, even in this little exchange, right? And this is Nymphadora. Don't call me Nymphadora, Remus, the young witch said with a shudder. It's Tonks, Nymphadora Tonks, who prefers to be known by her surname only, finished Lupin. I read that, by the way, to be that was always what Lupin was going to say. And this is Nymphadora Tonks, who prefers to be known by her surname only. That is, I believe, what the urbane and gentle Remus Lupin would have given as an introduction here. Let's gloss some of our characters. Of course, Remus Lupin introduced in Prisoner, mentioned in Goblet, but does not appear in Goblet, but will be a significant figure for a while now. No spoilers. Alistair Moody introduced, of course, most powerfully in Goblet of Fire, mostly under the guise of Bartemius Crouch Jr., but is introduced in person right at the end of that book, of course. This is the first appearance of Nymphadora Tonks. It's the first appearance of Emmeline Vance. It's the first appearance of Kingsley Shacklebolt, who will be terribly significant later, right? Vance is not going to be a particularly prominent character as we move forward, nor is Alpheus Doge, nor is Hestia Jones, nor is Sturgis Podmore, right? None of these characters are really going to step up into the spotlight of J.K. Rowling's narrative here in quite the way that Kingsley Shacklebolt is. And Daedalus Diggle, known for firing off shooting stars following the defeat of Voldemort back in 1981, right? If you go back to the very first chapter of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, you will see Minerva McGonagall make somewhat sniffy reference to Diggle at that point, right? That this is typical of him. He never had terribly good judgment, and Dumbledore steps in, of course, to defend him, observing that wizards need their celebrations now that Voldemort has been, well, defeated, whatever defeated might mean in that context, according to our understanding on the following day of the loss of his power back in 1981. Diggle also, of course, appears several times through the course of Harry's childhood, bowing to him. He is an unnamed wizard through that part, but he is a fairly familiar figure in that brief introduction that we get, that gloss of Harry's childhood. And then, of course, he is introduced properly when we get to the Leaky Cauldron, when Harry goes to Diagon Alley in the company of Hagrid back in the first book. We get a proper introduction to Diggle, who is just so thrilled and just so gosh darn excited to be here. I can completely understand why he would have volunteered for this advanced guard duty here. And we'll note, because this came up in the context of our discussion of genderblind and colorblind casting and adaptation in the context of last week's reading, Kingsley Shacklebolt, he indicated the tall black wizard who bowed. It is not a problem that Kingsley Shacklebolt is introduced as being black. That is absolutely fine. That is, God knows we could use a little more diversity in the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. It's just fine. But it is another example of black characters being introduced with a conspicuous reference to their ethnicity in a way that white characters are just not. So that is another powerful counter argument, if you're interested in making a powerful counter argument in terms of Hermione's ethnicity. This is another example of J.K. Rowling introducing a black character by calling out the color of his or her skin in this instance. Wow, the chat is just rocking tonight. There is no way that I'm going to keep up here. Axio Kim saying, I don't fancy the Lupin-Tonks relationship because I hard ship Lupin and Sirius. That is a very popular ship out there, and I don't hate it, actually. I really don't. I'm generally a little skeptical of oh boy, I'm generally a little skeptical of ships which seem to me to be a misreading of masculine friendships, right? Healthy, positive, empowering, non-toxic masculine friendships are rare in fiction. They're rare in the world too, but they're very rare in fiction. So I tend to preserve them. So I'm generally not a fan of Steve Rogers, Bucky Barnes ships, for example, or Steve Rogers, Tony Stark ships, basically any of the MCU hero ships. I'm generally not in favor of them because I value those friendships so much. Friendship is an undervalued virtue, an undervalued quality, an undervalued mode of human interaction in the modern world, and I like it a great deal. But I can see it with Lupin and Sirius a little more readily because there is an intimacy there. There is something connecting these two, thinking back to the Shrieking Shack at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, of course, there is something between these two characters that could bespeak that greater intimacy. But yeah, I can see that. Let me see. Chris is saying here, odd that practically every mentioned side character in the first several books are all coincidentally part of the Order. Like JK just couldn't be chuffed to come up with more wizardy names. I think that is, I think that is maybe fair, honestly. I think that is maybe fair. She's created some names and just kind of let them fall by the side of the narrative as we progress forward. But I think more purposefully and more intentionally what J.K. Rowling is doing here is deliberately integrating the first 4 books with the span of the series as a whole. I mentioned in last week's reading that Order of the Phoenix is the book where it becomes clear that J.K. Rowling is putting the primary focus on, well, okay, we might argue that the very end of Goblet of Fire is in fact this transitional point, right? The transition to Little Hangleton is the moment where the narrative breaks out of what has been a pretty well-established rhythm and a pretty well-established structure. That is the point at which we become more interested in the saga of Harry Potter, the series, rather than the individual novels. As I mentioned last time, that's actually a powerful subversive blow to our expectations right there at the end of Goblet of Fire, because everything about the Harry Potter series has, up until this point, convinced us that we are going to resolve the outstanding problem and everyone is going to live very happily and we're going to send Harry back to the Dursleys and he's going to have a long quiet summer and then we'll kick off the new plot at the start of the new school year. That is not what we are doing. And I think that J.K. Rowling's intent here in bringing back these characters and bringing back Arabella Figg and bringing back Mundungus Fletcher and bringing back Diggle here too, and of course Lupin and Alistair Moody too, never mind the other characters that we'll meet when we get to number 12 Grimmauld Place. This intent, it seems to me, is one of cohesion, I suppose, that she wants to draw a line of intentionality back to the very beginning of the first book. That's why we get Fig and Diggle in particular. I think the 2 other named wizards who crop up right at the beginning of Philosopher's Stone, you're absolutely right, Chris, play an active part in Order of the Phoenix, have already played, by the time that we're here in Chapter 3, have already played an active part in Order of the Phoenix. I think that that is an intentional bit of connectivity, that is an intentional statement about the kind of story that we are reading. No. You thought for the first 3 books and then half of the 4th book, 90% of the 4th book, that we were just telling episodic stories about a boy wizard and his adventures. No. That is not, in fact, what we are doing. And ultimately, I think that J.K. Rowling is actually going to deliver on that promise. I think that she is going to recast, in the course of this book, to a certain degree in Half-Blood Prince, and then very, very powerfully by the time we get to Deathly Hallows, she is actually going to reintegrate all of that earlier material into something much more unified. And to the degree that it is now, I think, impossible to think of those early books as standalone books. I think that if you were reading Harry Potter as it was coming out, if you had finished, Goblet, no, maybe not Goblet. Okay, if you had finished Prisoner, if you'd read the first 3 books, it would have been entirely possible to jump back into Chamber of Secrets and enjoy it as a standalone adventure, separated out from its continuity, its own internal continuity. But I don't think that it's as easy to do that anymore because so many of these details are brought back in. I also think it's indicative of a growing sophistication, a growing ambition, a growing capability, and honestly just a growing interest in this kind of long-form storytelling from J.K. Rowling. I think that her desire to integrate these details from the very beginning of the series with the fullest action of the series I think that desire, that intent is reflected in the growing length of these manuscripts, right? I think that one of the reasons that Order is such a long book isn't just because she's integrating all of this earlier material, but it is because she is raising her level of authorial ambition at this point. And for me, it works. For me, I am convinced by this. I am swayed by this. I am moved by this. This sequence is very, very powerful for me. I love these opening chapters, as I'm sure you can tell. So this is our introduction to our advance guard. As I say, most of these characters not terribly relevant. Besides Lupin and Moody, we're really going to spend time with Tonks and Kingsley Shacklebolt, who is not going to be terribly present, but is at least going to be very significant as we move forward through the end of the series. Stephanie saying, I love the idea that Harry has already seen some of these characters because as ex-Order members, they were intentionally keeping an eye out for Harry while being as unobtrusive as possible. Yes, I do completely agree. I'm a little unsure about the size of the Order at this point, right? When we get to 12 Grimmauld Place, Ron is going to note that he's seen maybe 20 wizards coming in and out, that there have been roughly 20 wizards in attendance, not all simultaneously, but there have been 20 wizards in attendance for these Order meetings. And that seems to be kind of stressing the understanding, the reader's understanding of how many wizards are included in the Order at this point. We don't have a comprehensive list of all the wizards who are taking part in the Order at this point, but if you consider everyone who is currently, right now, in this moment contained within the fiction, right now at 12 Grimmauld Place, who we're going to meet in due course, and then you think about the wizards who are here as part of the advance guard, and then you think about the rear guard that Mad-Eye Moody refers to, and then you think about other wizards who are notable in their absence, Dumbledore, for example. We've got quite, and then we're thinking, of course, about Fig and Mundungus Fletcher and other wizards too. We've got like quite a number of wizards associated, to the point that it is becoming surprising that there are any wizards that Harry has met in the course of his studies. I'm surprised that we didn't bring back Gilderoy Lockhart, right? Like, I'm surprised that we didn't bring back like really, I was going to say incidental, and Gilderoy Lockhart deserves better than that, but wizards who are not so much in our minds as we're reading this book too. Let's keep moving onward here. Half an hour into tonight's session already. Good Lord. All right, let's get into a little moment of quietness here between Harry and Tonks. Harry started picking up books and throwing them hastily into his trunks. Tonks paused at his open wardrobe to look critically at her reflection in the mirror on the inside of the door. "You know, I don't think purple's really my colour," she said pensively, tugging at a lock of spiky hair. "Do you think it makes me look a bit peaky?" Said Harry, looking up at her over the top of Quidditch teams of Britain and Ireland. "Yeah, it does," said Tonks decisively. She screwed up her eyes in a strained expression as though she were struggling to remember something. A second later, her hair had turned bubblegum pink. "How did you do that?" said Harry, gaping at her as she opened her eyes again. "I'm a metamorph magus," she said, looking back at her reflection and turning her head so she could see her hair from all directions. "It means I can change my appearance at will," she added, spotting Harry's puzzled expression in the mirror behind her. "I was born one. I got top marks in concealment and disguise during Auror training without any study at all. It was great." "You're an Auror," said Harry, impressed. Being a dark wizard catcher was the only career he'd ever considered after Hogwarts. "Yeah," said Tonks, looking proud. "Kingsley is as well. He's a bit higher up than I am, though. I only qualified a year ago. Nearly failed on stealth and tracking. I'm dead clumsy. Did you hear me break that plate when we arrived downstairs?" "Can you learn how to be a metamorph magus?" Harry asked her, straightening up, completely forgetting about packing. Tonks chuckled. "Bet you wouldn't mind hiding that scar sometimes, eh?" Her eyes found the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's forehead. "No, I wouldn't mind," Harry mumbled, turning away. He did not like people staring at his scar. And so we get the introduction of the Metamorph Magus. Tonks can apparently change her appearance at will, though with a moment's thought, right? She has to screw up her eyes in a strained expression as though she was struggling to remember something. A second later, her hair had turned bubblegum pink. It isn't entirely subconscious. It isn't entirely intuitive. It is a thing she has to think about, but she can do it. But much more importantly, she's an Auror. And being an Auror is the only thing that Harry wants to be when he leaves Hogwarts. This is the only thing that he has considered for his future career, which is perhaps surprising given his skill at Quidditch. It is at least a little surprising that he hasn't given serious thought to entering professional sports as a career. But no, he wants to be an Auror. And of course, entering into professional sports would be antithetical to Harry's notion of his own heroism and certainly his position in the wizarding world as an exceptional figure. But of course, that would be true if it were any other sport but Quidditch, or if Harry were anything but a seeker. Seekers, of course, still exceptional heroes, as we've discussed many times before here on Dear Mr. Potter. Seekers still exceptional figures, even within the team sport structure of Quidditch. Aurors, though. I realized today that I have never paid any attention to the word Auror. I have never paid any attention to its origins or its mechanics in the world, and it doesn't have, as many of J.K. Rowling's original proper nouns do, and many of her neologistic turns of phrase do in the course of Harry Potter, it doesn't have a completely transparent origin. It's something a little obscure. It's something a little skewed, I would say. The most likely meaning of the word aura, or the most likely source of the word aura, would be the Latin word aurum, meaning gold, which also gives us the word aurora in English, meaning dawn. An association there. It's not... Aurum does mean gold in Latin, but it became connotatively associated with the gleam of gold and with the reflected light of gold more than just the substance itself. It was more like this is a resplendent golden thing rather than simply saying it is either made of gold or it is gold in color. Aurum kind of took on that connotative meaning long before it transitioned into English, but it does give us the word aurora, of course, meaning lights in the sky. This is, I think, probably the most deft bit of etymology that we can do with the word auror. That is to say that an auror is a warrior of the light, right? We're borrowing that connotation there from the Latin and the transposition into English. And of course, that sits beautifully with the opposition with dark wizardry, right? Aurors are dark wizard catchers. They are like the, what is the government agency that is probably closest? Are they controlled by national boundaries? Probably not. I don't know. In fact, definitely not, right? Because we've got the run-in with Moody and Karkaroff, for example. So probably across national boundaries. So they are more like the CIA, I guess. That would be like the real world association for aurors. It is also possible that auror is derived not from the Latin word aurum, but rather from the Latin word auris, meaning ear. That is to say that aurors are listeners. This is the same root origin as the word oral, aural, meaning something that something connected to sound, something that can be heard. So it is possible that aurors too are listeners, that it is more of a spycraft kind of role than it is a direct combat role. More a spycraft role than it is the paladin-like warriors of light with sword and shield standing astride the world, fighting back the forces of darkness. I think actually that latter definition works. I mean, the latter definition that I just gave, the first definition that I gave in this discussion of the etymology of the word auror, that it is related to the dawn, that it is related to light, that it is related to brightness, and is therefore set in opposition to the darkness of dark wizardry. That, I think, is my preferred interpretation of that. And we will certainly talk a little more about aurors right in the middle of the book, when Harry gets some career advice from Minerva McGonagall in what is a genuinely lovely scene. I very much like that scene. We'll talk about that when we get to it. What really stands out to me here, though, is exactly what I mentioned earlier, that ability of Tonks to resonate with Harry's own experience. Harry is immediately taken with Tonks. Like, he immediately is impressed by her. That is, evident from the page, and not terribly usual, particularly given Harry's frame of mind, right? "How did you do that?" said Harry, gaping at her as she opened her eyes again. She explains, I'm a metamorph magus. I was born when I got top marks in concealment and disguise during auror training without any study at all. It was great. You're an auror. This is fantastic. Not only can you change your appearance, but you're an auror. You are literally everything I want to be. Why does Harry ask about being a metamorph magus? Well, because he wants to conceal his scar. His general appearance too, because let's face it, it's not as though, even without the scar, it's not as though Harry would be difficult to recognize in the context of the wizarding world right now, right? He's had his face in the Daily Prophet enough times. He is the champion of the Triwizard Tournament, right? And most wizards are going to, particularly in Britain, are going to know who Harry Potter is even without the scar. But he's invested in the idea of changing his appearance, of not being this guy, of not having all of this attention poured onto him. This, of course, is encapsulated here at the end of this slide. He did not like people staring at his scar, but this also relates to that notion of being thrust onto stage that we got in the previous slide. He is the focus of, well, a lot of attention right now, and it is a lot of attention that is not entirely positive attention, at least in the sense that it is not all attention that makes Harry feel more comfortable or more secure. There are other things going on here. Let's continue our journey here as I scroll rampantly through the chat to here. Kulu is linking out to a meme post here. Harry Potter was a trust fund jock who married his high school sweetheart and became a cop. Yeah, I mean, basically, again, no spoilers. Basically, yes, like there is a reading of that. The thing that redeems Harry from that kind of judgment, I think, particularly by the time that we get to him, beyond his personal suffering, beyond his personal sacrifice, which is important and is oftentimes overlooked, beyond all of that, what really matters for Harry is his exceptionalism, is our understanding that he is unusual in the wizarding world, that this is a narrative thrust here rather than the insistence of the character himself. Fredmont saying here in the chat, Harry seems like a kid again for a few pages. Yes, I think that's it. So often in the course of Order of the Phoenix, this is true in Goblet of Fire 2, of course, where we're deliberately opposing Harry with the other champions of the Triwizard Tournament who are much older than him, right? He's finding himself between two established identities. He does not himself have an established identity. This is, of course, the tyranny of adolescence, right? You are constantly in flux. You are constantly unsure. You are constantly unfixed in terms of your relationship with yourself, in terms of your relationship with the outside world, in terms of your relationship with your society in the broadest sense. To be an adolescent is to be in a state of flux. But Harry in particular finds himself in a state of flux because he is the boy who lived. He's the one who has told everyone that Voldemort has returned. He is in part responsible, for Voldemort returning, but he's also still a child. He's also still untrusted. That is, or believes himself to be untrusted at this point. More on that, of course, as we progress. Okay, let's get to the plan here. Gosh, I'm taking my own sweet time through the slides tonight. "Come on," said Moody, unlocking the back door with his wand. They all stepped outside into Uncle Vernon's beautifully kept lawn. "Clear night," grunted Moody, his magical eyes scanning the heavens. "Could have done with a bit more cloud cover." "Right, you," he barked at Harry. "We're going to be flying in close formation. Tonks will be right in front of you. Keep close on her tail. Lupin will be covering you from below. I'm going to be behind you. The rest will be circling us. We don't break ranks for anything. Got me? If one of us is killed..." "Is that likely?" Harry asked apprehensively, but Moody ignored him. "The others keep flying. Don't stop. Don't break ranks. If they take out all of us and you survive, Harry, the rear guard will be standing by to take over. Keep flying east and they'll join you." "Stop being so cheerful, Mad-Eye. He'll think we're not taking this seriously," said Tonks, as she strapped Harry's trunk and Hedwig's cage into a harness hanging from her broom. "I'm just telling the boy the plan," growled Moody. "Our job's to deliver him safely to headquarters, and if we die in the attempt..." "No one's going to die," said Kingsley Shacklebolt in his deep, calming voice. "Mount your brooms! That's the first signal," said Lupin sharply, pointing into the sky. Joseph saying, "And for the love of God, if you see a snitch, just let it go. Not now, Harry." That is how you separate Harry from the advance guard, of course. Just throw a snitch generally toward him and instinct will take over. That's all that we need. As Wilhelm Scream says, if you love a snitch, let it go. If it comes back to you, then it was meant to be. That's another powerful lesson that we can learn here. Yes, and C-Star is saying, "The absence of side-along apparition as an option here has been debated elsewhere." Yes, this is not a thing that J.K. Rowling had apparently considered prior to its appearance later in the series. The requirement of Harry fleeing Privet Drive on broom is insisted upon by the narrative in a way that doesn't completely stand up to scrutiny later in our discussion, particularly alongside the explanation that he can't apparate because he's too young. That's it, right? We've used Floo powder before in the context of number 4 Privet Drive. We have another wizard's house very nearby, right? We could go to Arabella Figg's house. Presumably she has an open fireplace for convenient Floo transport. Not that she could, well, could she use it? No, she probably couldn't use it. I think that there is a magical component. It's not just being a member. Can Squibs use Floo powder? Huh. I'm going to be thinking about that now. That is going to be a question that is going to haunt me. I don't know that we get as Joseph Shannon says, mumble, mumble, ministry, mumble, mumble. And Nikki observes Moody cranking up the dramatic atmosphere. Isn't he though? Isn't this fantastic? Could have done with a bit more cloud cover. Right, you are going to be flying in close formation. Tonks will be right in front of you. Keep close on her tail. Lupin will be covering you from below. I'm going to be behind you. The rest will be circling us. We don't break ranks for anything. Got me? If one of us is killed. Is this Moody's paranoia, right? Moody is an avowed paranoiac, right? We had that discussion back in Goblet of Fire, and certainly when Barty Crouch in the form of Moody is acting in a wildly paranoid way, no one calls it out as being unusual, right? Not Dumbledore, not Minerva McGonagall, not people who would presumably know the real Mad-Eye Moody. So it seems that that was actually an accurate reflection of the real Alastor Moody. You'll also note that the real Alastor Moody also compulsively swigs from his flask. This is another little character detail, which was very convenient for Barty Crouch and his imbibing of the Polyjuice potion. So we take off, we go, right? The elevation of the dramatic tone here is really quite beautifully done, I think. And the notion of this rear guard, right? If we all fail and you get through, then we've done our job. It's war. It's war that is happening now. It hasn't been declared. It hasn't been made public. Not everyone is even open to the possibility that this is where we are in the context of the wizarding world right now. But as far as Moody is concerned, and apparently, given their willingness to volunteer for this duty despite the danger, apparently all of these other wizards are too. We are at war in this point. Chris is saying, and then there's also a rear guard, yeah? Harry gets more protection here than most muggle heads of state. And the next book, it's just Dumbledore gives perspective on how ungodly powerful everyone sees him. I think that's completely fair too. Yeah, well, of course, God, we're going to have lots of opportunity to talk about Dumbledore too. Yeah. Okay, let's get to the end of this chapter and the introduction of number 12, Grimmauld Place. Where are we? Harry asked, but Lupin said quietly, in a minute. Moody was rummaging in his cloak, his gnarled hands clumsy with cold. Got it, he muttered, raising what looked like a silver cigarette lighter into the air and clicking it. The nearest street lamp went out with a pop. He clicked the unlighter again, the next lamp went out. He kept clicking until every lamp in the square was extinguished, and the only light in the square came from curtained windows and the sickle moon overhead. Borrowed it from Dumbledore, growled Moody, pocketing the put-outer. That'll take care of any muggles looking out of the window, see? Now come on, quick. He took Harry by the arm and led him from the patch of grass across the road and onto the pavement. Lupin and Tonks followed, carrying Harry's trunk between them, and the rest of the guard all with their wands out flanking them. The muffled pounding of a stereo was coming from an upper window in the nearest house. A pungent smell of rotting rubbish came from a pile of bulging bin bags just inside the broken gate. Here, Moody muttered, thrusting a piece of parchment toward Harry's disillusioned hand and holding his lit wand close to it so as to illuminate the writing. Read quickly, memorize. Harry looked down at the piece of paper. The narrow handwriting was vaguely familiar. It said, The headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix may be found at number 12, Grimmauld Place, London. Harry here being added to the list of people who know the secret of number 12, Grimmauld Place, which we'll get to in just a moment. Jackie saying, clumsy with cold. How cold is it? I thought this was an unusually warm summer. It is an unusually warm summer, but Harry did not think to bring a coat as they were flying across London here to Islington, where one can find Grimmauld Place. Harry is commenting throughout the flight that it is cold, presumably because they are flying high, right? Moody urges them to fly ever higher. It's a cold night to be flying, I guess. It doesn't really matter how warm the August weather is when you're flying across London in the dead of night, some distance above the ground, I would imagine. That certainly seems to be the implication here. I want to call out a really nice bit of textual resonance here, and it all rests upon the put-outer. Here we have a scenario in which the Muggle street lamps are being extinguished to cover Harry's arrival at his new home, right? At a place of residence, a place of apparent safety for Harry. We are putting out the streetlights with Dumbledore's put-outer. Harry is arriving by air, of course, not in this instance on the back of Sirius Black's motorcycle in the company of Hagrid, but rather on his very own broomstick in the company of the advanced guard of the Order of the Phoenix. But this is not dissimilar from the opening of Philosopher's Stone. This is a really quite beautiful and subtle echo of the opening of that book. The inclusion of the put-outer, I think, is very specific here. Do we need it here? Is it absolutely vital to gaining access to number 12 Grimmauld Place? Well, no, probably not, right? The Muggles don't seem to notice this house appearing out of nowhere. It seems as though the enchantment on number 12 Grimmauld Place is more complete than that. It seems unlikely that enchantment is going to be ruined by a Muggle peeking out of the window and seeing a group of 9 wizards arrayed in the street. This is, I believe, a repetition of the opening beat there from Philosopher's Stone to indicate that Harry is about to transition into a new phase of his life, which, by the way, he absolutely is. His introduction to number 12 Grimmauld Place, his reintroduction to his community, and his introduction to the Order of the Phoenix, all of which is going to occur in the course of the next chapter, is a powerful turning point in Harry Potter's life. If you distill out all of Harry's experiences, this is one of the more important ones in terms of his overall arc here. Good. Let me see. James Birkin here is saying Dumbledore rolled a nat 3 when he tried to name the put-outer. I kind of love the ungainly inelegance of the put-outer. It is very much a, first thought, best thought from Dumbledore here. Like, it is not the, the illuminative extinguisher. It is not the, the endarkener. No, it's the put-outer. That's exactly what it is, right? I like that very much. Grimmauld, too. Yes, Marshall saying here, Grimmauld Place is a darker liminal / threshold into the wizard world than any we've seen so far. Appropriate for the darkening tone. I completely agree. Grimmauld here, right? Combining the words grim and old, right? That it's really that simple. It is grim and it is old. It is redolent of oppression and of darkness and of a kind of brooding malevolence and antiquity. All of these things combined as we transit into Grimmauld Place. Ryan saying liminal everyone drink, which is of course a part of the Dear Mr. Potter drinking game. I don't think that counts when I'm quoting Marshall, though. I think I have to say that spontaneously before it's a part of the drinking game. I mean, you guys play by your own rules, don't get me wrong. I am not the arbiter of the drinking game. I can't even take part in the drinking game, though. Gosh, someday I should. Maybe in our very last session of Dear Mr. Potter ever. I should. Maybe not the last session. We'll probably have some other things to talk about in the last session of Dear Mr. Potter. Maybe we'll do like a fan fiction roundtable or something like that where I can take part in the drinking game. I think that would be well, ill-advised, honestly. I feel like I'll probably get an email from the Surgeon General warning against that. But anyway, into Chapter 4, into number 12, Grimmauld Place. We will observe the note here. We'll have time to circle back around to this in next week's reading. I think the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix may be found at number 12, Grimmauld Place, London, right? This is the passing on of the secret for reasons which will become clear in due course. Let's get into our new safe house. What's the order of the... Harry began. Not here, boy, snarled Moody. Wait till we're inside. He pulled the piece of parchment out of Harry's hand and set fire to it with his wand tip. As the message curled into flames and floated to the ground, Harry looked around at the houses again. They were standing outside number 11. He looked to his left and saw number 10. To the right, however, was number 13. But where's... Think about what you just memorized, said Lupin quietly. Harry thought... And no sooner had he reached the part about number 12 Grimmauld Place than a battered door emerged out of nowhere between numbers 11 and 13, followed swiftly by dirty walls and grimy windows. It was as though an extra house had inflated, pushing those on either side out of its way. Harry gaped at it. The stereo in number 11 thudded on. Apparently the muggles inside hadn't even felt anything. Come on, hurry, growled Moody, prodding Harry in the back. Harry walked up the worn stone steps, staring at the newly materialized door. Its black paint was shabby and scratched. The silver door knocker was in the form of a twisted serpent. There was no keyhole or letterbox. Lupin pulled out his wand and tapped the door once. Harry heard many loud metallic clicks and what sounded like the clatter of a chain. The door creaked open. Get in, Harry. Quick. Get in quick, Harry, Lupin whispered. But don't go too far inside and don't touch anything. Harry stepped over the threshold into the almost total darkness of the hall. He could smell damp, dust, and a sweetish, rotting smell. The place had the feeling of a derelict building. He looked over his shoulder and saw the others filing in behind him, Lupin and Tonks carrying his trunk and Hedwig's cage. Moody was standing on the top step and releasing the balls of light the put-outer had stolen from the street lamps. They flew back to their bulbs, and the square beyond glowed momentarily with orange light before Moody limped inside and closed the front door, so that the darkness in the hall became complete. Now you can drink, because this is, as Marshall observed, a powerful liminal transition, a powerful threshold transition into, again, a liminal space, right? Threshold transitions do not always require or rest upon a suspended liminal space. Suspended liminal spaces are something that J.K. Rowling is clearly enchanted by, is fascinated by. We get more prolonged suspended liminal spaces, transitional spaces in J.K. Rowling's work, in the Harry Potter series, than we do in most fantasy stories, right? Unless you're willing to kind of expand out your definition of the truly liminal to incorporate fairy stories and the transit into capital F fairy from the mundane realm, then really J.K. Rowling is arguably more interested in liminal spaces and more interested in suspending her characters within liminal spaces than anyone else I can think of. We suspend characters in liminal spaces all the time. We do it with the Hogwarts Express. We do it with Diagon Alley, is a kind of liminal space in and of itself. It is an incomplete space caught betwixt and between. The Hogwarts Express, as I said, we get, oh gosh, what is the, I just had another one that is now just dropped out of my memory. I'm thinking, of course, of the transit into Hogwarts during the first year, the crossing of the lake. These are a series of successive thresholds capping the experience on the Hogwarts Express. The Forbidden Forest, the way that we treat the Forbidden Forest is oftentimes as a liminal space. And of course, we're going to get to the Room of Requirement, which is almost explicitly a liminal space, right? That is almost a textual, intentional liminal space within the text of Harry Potter. So J.K. Rowling loves them. Number 12, Grimmauld Place, is probably the most powerful. It is probably the most evocative. It is probably the most complex and textured, particularly vis-a-vis our relationship to Harry's experience, as well as Harry's relationship to his experience, right? For us, these threshold states are oftentimes more transparent than they are to Harry, or less transparent than they are to Harry. One of the great things about Grimmauld Place is that it unifies both our response and Harry's response in a really complex way. And of course, not just Harry's response, but the response of everyone who is here, with the possible sole exception of Sirius Black. Yeah. Ella asking if the Blacks consider themselves so high above Muggles why live in a place surrounded by them. This is one of the great unanswered questions, right? Presumably because it predates that kind of socialization. What is the history of the wizarding world vis-a-vis Muggles? Perhaps we can talk about Fantastic Beasts 2. We can talk about Grindelwald, and we can talk about the previous interactions and intersections between the wizarding world and the Muggle world at some point in the future. Yeah. And this is also true. Recyclops saying because they were there before the city was, presumably, which I have always really liked as a definition, right? I don't think we have time to untangle this tonight. Let's untangle that next week when we're actually talking about the history of number 12 Grimmauld Place, when we get a chance to really talk to Sirius and talk about what this house is. But yeah, let's keep a pin in that. Hey, you can drink for that too. And Barry Cook saying, oh, and here inside the door are the taxidermied heads of generations of slaves. Yeah, just totally cool. Your taxidermied slave heads. Like, what wizarding family of old and pure blood doesn't have that? Actually, what wizarding family of old and pure blood doesn't have that? We'll get back to it. Yes. Let me see as I try and catch up. Yes, Fredmont saying 12 Grimmauld is where he is first offered a seat at the adult table. Granted, it takes this whole book for the adults to realize the importance of keeping the trio in the loop. Yes. And Recyclops saying a liminal space within a liminal space within a liminal space. Yup. We love that in the works of J.K. Rowling. Like I said, if you want like the most powerful evocation of that, go back and look at the first year transit into Hogwarts, right? That everything basically from Platform 9 3/4, from the moment that we step through the wall into Platform 9 3/4, right at the beginning there, to the moment that we reach the Great Hall, arguably, there is nothing but a succession of intersecting and interlocking and elementally inflected threshold states and liminal spaces. It's beautifully done. It's genuinely gorgeously orchestrated. We discussed that, I don't know, years ago now, back when I started the first season of Dear Mr. Potter. You can track back and find that discussion. All right, let's yes, okay, we're good. Let's keep pushing on. Yeah, I called out the reference here to the beginning of Philosopher's Stone. We can continue to move ever onward here. He caught a brief glimpse of a gloomy, high-ceilinged, twin-bedded room, and that there was a loud twittering noise, followed by an even louder shriek, and his vision was completely obscured by a large quantity of very bushy hair. Hermione had thrown herself onto him in a hug that nearly knocked him flat, while Ron's tiny owl, Pigwidgeon, zoomed excitedly round and round their head. Harry! Ron, he's here! Harry's here! We didn't hear you arrive! Oh, how are you? Are you all right? Have you been furious with us? I bet you have. I know our letters were useless, but we couldn't tell you anything. Dumbledore made us swear we wouldn't. Oh, we've got so much to tell you, and you've got to tell us. The Dementors? When we heard, and that ministry hearing, it's just outrageous. I've looked it all up. They can't expel you. They just can't. There's a provision in the decree for the restriction of underage sorcery for the use of magic in life-threatening situations. Let him breathe, Hermione, said Ron, grinning, closing the door behind Harry. He seemed to have grown several more inches during their month apart, making him taller and more gangly looking than ever, though the long nose, bright red hair, and freckles were the same. Hermione, still beaming, let go of Harry, but before she could say another word, there was a soft whooshing and something white soared from the top of a dark wardrobe and landed gently on Harry's shoulder. Hedwig! The snowy owl clicked her beak and nibbled his ear affectionately as Harry stroked her feathers. Oh, yeah, Harry said. Sorry about that, but I wanted answers, you know. We wanted to give them to you, mate, said Ron. Hermione was going spare. She kept saying you'd do something stupid if you were stuck all on your own without news, but Dumbledore made us. Swear not to tell me, said Harry. Yeah, Hermione's already said. The warm glow that had flared inside him at the sight of his two best friends was extinguished as something icy flooded the pit of his stomach. All of a sudden, after yearning to see them for a solid month, he felt he would rather Ron and Hermione left him alone. Harry. Not the greatest moment from the titular Harry Potter here. Of course, the rush of Hermione's dialogue is fantastic. We're going to focus as we move through the reintroduction of Hermione and Ron, as we move through the rest of this chapter, really, we're going to focus on the response of the other characters to Harry's new somewhat exaggerated emotional state, and the response of the narrative to Harry's emotional state too. We are still finding ourselves in Harry's POV, and we are still mindful of the fact that his emotional state is not a considered one. It is not a rational one. It is happening outside of his control. It is an intuitive fluctuation, and it is an autonomic fluctuation in his own emotional state, right? The warm glow that had flared inside him at the sight of his two best friends, it had flared inside him. He had not enkindled it, it had flared inside him. It was a response to outside stimuli, and it has been replaced by another response to outside stimuli, was extinguished by something icy, flooded the pit of his stomach. All of a sudden, after yearning to see them for a solid month, he felt he would rather Ron and Hermione left him alone. Hermione, of course, is treating this with absolute empathy, right? The idea that Hermione is coldly rationalistic and intellectually biased and incapable of empathy is absolutely and demonstrably untrue, has been demonstrated to be false many, many times in the course of these books, particularly within the frame of Goblet of Fire with regard to her relationship with Ron in that book, and even to a certain extent with her relationship with the SPEW and the whole House Elf conundrum. Hermione has been proven to be a very empathetic person, right? We are not in Philosopher's Stone, Chamber of Secrets. Hermione is intellectual and logical, and Ron is just a bundle of feelings, just a bundle of like loyalty and desire and gratification, I suppose. We've kind of developed both of these characters past those initial conceptions, and even those notions of these characters presented as initial conceptions, that's also still like a little thin, right? You have to drill down a little bit to get to the course of these characters. But we know that Hermione is empathic. We know that she is sensitive, particularly to Harry and to Ron, and here she's expressing that, right? Are you all right? Have you been furious with us? I bet you have. I know our letters were useless, but we couldn't tell you anything. Dumbledore made us swear we wouldn't. Oh, we've got so much to tell you, and you've got to tell us the Dementors. The way that her language here is so fragmented. Okay, first we get the outright acknowledgement. Are you furious with us? You must be. Our letters must have been useless. I'm so sorry, right? An open, outright apology right up front. And then the fragmented dialogue as she's trying to pursue her own, complicated emotional response to Harry at this point, as she's trying to pursue this through to its logical conclusion, and doing so in her Hermionian way, already talking about like the legal response to the accusations from the Ministry here. There's a provision in the decree for the restriction of underage sorcery about the use of magic in life-threatening situations. And there's Ron. Let him breathe, Hermione said, Ron, grinning, closing the door behind Harry. Like, still Ron. They are not anticipating anything different from Harry here. Hermione is acknowledging the fact that he is probably angry with them, that he may even be furious with them, that he may be feeling exiled from their community because of this injunction that has been placed upon them by Dumbledore, but they're not really thinking that is going to last. This is clearly delivered. Hermione's emphatic and anarchic monologue here is clearly delivered with the expectation of immediate reconciliation, and Ron isn't even worried about it. Let him breathe, Hermione said, Ron grinning, closing the door behind Harry, right? It's still Ron, it's still Hermione, it's still Harry. The world has turned to wreck and ruin. Like, the world is dark, but they're still the three of them. They're still our power trio. Harry's response, though, well, is more complicated than that. Here we go, with all caps. Maybe he thinks I can't be trusted, said Harry, watching their expressions. Don't be thick, said Ron, looking highly disconcerted. Or that I can't take care of myself. Of course he doesn't think that, said Hermione anxiously. So how come I have to stay at the Dursleys while you two get to join in everything that's going on here, said Harry, the words tumbling over one another in a rush, his voice growing louder with every word. How come you two are allowed to know everything that's going on? We're not, Ron interrupted. Mum won't let us near the meeting. She says we're too young. But before he knew it, Harry was shouting. So you haven't been in the meetings. Big deal. You've still been here, haven't you? You've still been together. Me, I've been stuck at the Dursleys for a month. But I've handled more than the two of you have ever managed, and Dumbledore knows it. Who saved the Sorcerer's Stone? Who got rid of Riddle? Who saved both your skins from the Dementors? Every bitter and resentful thought that Harry had had in the past month was pouring out of him. His frustration at the lack of news, the hurt that they had all been together without him, his fury at being followed and not told about it. All the feelings he was half ashamed of finally burst their boundaries. Hedwig took fright at the noise and soared off on top of the wardrobe again. Pigwidgeon twittered in alarm and zoomed even faster around their heads. Who had to get past dragons and sphinxes and every other foul thing last year? Who saw him come back? Who had to escape from him? Me! Ron was standing there with his mouth half open, clearly stunned and at a loss for anything to say, while Hermione looked on the verge of tears. Every bitter and resentful thought that Harry had had in the past month was pouring out of him. His frustration at the lack of news, the hurt they had all been together without him, his fury at being followed and not told about it, all the feelings he was half ashamed of finally burst their boundaries. So those are the feelings that are bursting their boundaries, right? Those are apparently, well, if not the root of Harry's anger throughout the first 3 chapters of this book, at least the feelings which are being expressed here, right? I mean, that's what the text tells us, and the text certainly wouldn't mislead us about Harry's emotional state, right? His frustration at the lack of news, the hurt that they had all been together without him, his fury at being followed and not told about it, all the feelings is what he says. So you haven't been in the meetings, big deal, he says. Okay, he's jealous that they've been still together without him. You've still been here, haven't you? You've still been together. Me, I've been stuck at the Dursleys for a month. Great, fair. That is actually acknowledging this alleged interiority for Harry at this point. He is hurt and furious at being exiled from his community, at being kept in the dark, about being protected when he wants to be a part of the fight. I've handled more than the 2 of you have ever managed, and Dumbledore knows it. Who saved the Sorcerer's Stone? Who got rid of Riddle? Who saved both your skins from the Dementors? In the list of things that Harry is feeling right now, where is this self-righteous sense of his own power? This desire for recognition, this proof that he is exceptional, that he is more powerful, that he is the hero of the piece. Who had to get past dragons and sphinxes and every other foul thing last year? Who saw him come back? Who had to escape from him? Me! This is not, at least not fully, an expression of fear or an expression of concern or an expression of wounded feelings at being excluded, at being left out of this discussion. His frustration at the lack of news, the hurt they had all been together without him, his fury at being followed and not told about it. This is not... Jackie's saying no spoilers, but aren't we forgetting the most important reason Harry's so furious throughout the book? We kind of touched on that last week and we're kind of building to it, but yeah, basically yes. The reason that I'm leaning so hard on this is that a lot of readers are thrown out by Harry's fury, by Harry's adolescent fury, and a lot of readers ascribe it to, well, he's hormonal and he's a teenager, or they ascribe it to a kind of PTSD, both of which, by the way, valid interpretations, but incomplete interpretations is my argument here. There is clearly something else that is happening to Harry. We've seen Hermione talk Harry down before. We've seen Ron talk Harry down before. We've seen very complicated feelings, and we've seen firecrackers of anger between all 3 of them, right? We can't go more than a few pages in Goblet of Fire without one of them sniping at one of the others. It feels that way, certainly in the middle of the book. Ron was standing there with his mouth half open, clearly stunned and at a loss for anything to say, while Hermione looked on the verge of tears. The narrative voice of this novel does not allow us to normalize Harry's behavior here. We are not allowed to integrate this Harry, this dialogue, with our understanding of who this character is. It is discordant. It is purposefully so. And it's heartbreaking. Harry is not... And the reason that I'm parsing this so carefully, and the reason that I'm pulling this out, is because I don't want to suggest that we are in any way kind of seeking to explain away Harry's emotional state here, that we are seeking to rationalize or to minimize what is maybe, like, okay, let's take the harshest possible interpretation of this, right? J.K. Rowling just lost her handle on Harry, and she wrote a bad version of Harry in the first half of this book. Like, this Harry is just awful. He's just a bad character. Like, we don't like him. We're not interested in him. His interiority is not compelling, is not fully real. I am not trying to explain what I believe to be a weakness in J.K. Rowling's work. What I'm trying to do is illuminate what I genuinely believe to be brilliance in J.K. Rowling's work. The fact that the narrative never allows us to integrate Harry's emotional response here, the fact that the narrative has leaned very heavily on Harry's emotional response right from that first pickup, right? When he's laying outside the window listening to the 7 o'clock news through the open window of number 4 Privet Drive, and he feels that he ought to be congratulated on it. What is this desire for appreciation and approbation? This is not Harry Potter. And this certainly isn't Harry Potter. Who saved the Sorcerer's Stone? Who got rid of Riddle? Who saved both of your skins from the Dementors? Who had to get past dragons and sphinxes and every other foul thing last year? Who saw him come back? Who had to escape from him? Me. Despite the fact, of course, that Harry would not have accomplished any of those things without Ron and Hermione. Who saved the Sorcerer's Stone? The 3 of you. Harry, yes, of course, your name is on the cover of the book, so you faced down Quirrell and you did the thing. Who got rid of Riddle? Who saved your skins from the Dementors? Who got past the dragons and the sphinxes, every other foul thing last year? You definitely couldn't have done that without the help of your entire extended cast, in fact. Who saw him come back? Who had to escape from him? Me. This is not our Harry, is in effect what I'm getting at here. Oh, and Dr. Gallifrey saying, could the effect of the Dementors and the Dudley attack still be influencing Harry? Possibly in part. The iciness that we noted in the last slide, that icy cold is something that we associate with Dementors, right? And this is the third time post-Dementor assault that it has cropped up for Harry. It is the third time that he has felt that icy cold take him over. So yes, it is possible, but Harry is pretty comprehensively in this mode, right? Prior to the Dementor attack, he is already spoiling for a fight. You remember when he's on the swing set in the playground and he sees Dudley and his gang walk by, and Dudley and his gang don't notice him, and Harry is thinking to himself, just look around, just see me, because if you see me, you are gonna come and start something with me, and if you start something with me, then I get to blow off some steam. I get to exhibit my power. I get to release some of this pressure within me, right? That's what he's thinking in that moment prior to the Dementor attack. And then, of course, going hunting Dudley, provoking Dudley, goading Dudley, acting as a full-on antagonist, right? Not to suggest that Dudley Dursley is in any way innocent or even like a passably good character up to that point, good in the sense of virtuous. There's anything to commend Dudley to the reader's recommendation here. Even besides all of that, Harry is angry and Harry is violent even before the Dementor attack. Violent, predisposed to violence even before the Dementor attack. Also, Harry is self-righteous. Also, Harry is very concerned with his own position and praise and recognition in a outright Voldemortian fashion, right? This is Voldemort's influence. I'm going to continue to argue this is Voldemort's influence over Harry. This is the response. It's this recognition that he wants. Who got past dragons and sphinxes? Who saw him come back? Who had to escape from him? Me. And I deserve to be recognized. You know who should be running the meeting of the Order of the Phoenix? Me. Maybe Dumbledore. But then sitting next to him at the table? Me. I should be there. This is about... This is Harry striving to find that recognition, which is, of course, a classic Tom Riddle Voldemort kind of move. Okay, we're almost out of time. Let's keep pushing forward. Harry, we're really sorry, said Hermione desperately, her eyes now sparkling with tears. You're absolutely right, Harry. I'd be furious if it was me. Harry glared at her, still breathing deeply, then turned away from them again, pacing up and down. Hedwig hooted glumly from the top of the wardrobe. There was a long pause, broken only by the mournful creak of the floorboards below Harry's feet. What is this place, anyway? He shot at Ron and Hermione. Headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, said Ron at once. Is anyone going to bother telling me what the Order of the Phoenix... It's a secret society, said Hermione quickly. Dumbledore's in charge. He founded it. It's the people who fought against you-know-who last time. Who's in it? Said Harry, coming to a halt with his hands in his pockets. Quite a few people. We've met about 20 of them, said Ron, but we think there are more. Harry glared at them. Well, he demanded, looking from one to the other. Said Ron. Well, what? Voldemort, said Harry furiously, and both Ron and Hermione winced. What's happening? What's he up to? Where is he? What are we doing to stop him? We've told you the Order doesn't let us in on their meetings, said Hermione nervously, so we don't know the details, but we've got a general idea, she added hastily, seeing the look on Harry's face. Again, if we want to understand what is actually happening with Harry here, we have to look at what Harry is actually doing here. This is classic bullying behavior. This is Machiavellian in the sense that he is trying to keep Ron and Hermione off balance. He is trying to keep them out of their comfort zone, right? Hermione, her eyes sparkling with tears, trying again to communicate this empathy, right? She already tried once. It was literally the first thing she said to him when he came through the door. Harry, we're really sorry. You're absolutely right, Harry. I'd be furious if it was me. Using his name twice in the attributed dialogue there, right? Using the name twice. J.K. Rowling uses names quite a lot in her attributed dialogue. Never so much that it's outright obnoxious, right? It's not falling into that classic fantasy trope of characters saying other characters' names every time they address them. She doesn't quite fall there, but it is still enough that it's conspicuous that she uses Harry's name twice there, as though she is trying to reach him, as though she's trying to connect to him, right? Harry glared at her, still breathing deeply. So he's now disconnecting. He's removing himself from the immediate conversation and keeping them hanging, right? He's pacing. Hedwig hooted glumly from the top of the wardrobe. There was a long pause broken only by the mournful creak of the floorboards below. What is this place anyway? He shouted. So he's quiet for a moment and then he's on the assault again. What is this place anyway? Is anyone going to bother telling me what the Order of the Phoenix? And Hermione coming in. It's a secret society. Dumbledore's in charge. He founded it. It's the people who fought against you-know-who last time. Interesting there that Hermione is using you-know-who. Interesting that she is still falling into that naming convention for Voldemort there. Who's in it? Says Harry. And then when he gets his answer, quite a few people, we've met about 20 of them, but we think there are more. Harry glared at them. Well, he demanded, looking from one to the other. Well, what? Voldemort, said Harry furiously. Like, deliberately using that name, I think, furiously, shouting that name at Ron and Hermione. This is abusive behavior. This is not just the expression of frustration or the expression of fear, even the expression of anger, the expression of fury. This is, I mean, perilously close to emotional violence, what he's doing here, right? He can see that Hermione is already on the verge of tears, right? Ron is aghast and Hermione is on the verge of tears. And then when she is her eyes now sparkling with tears, like she's not just on the verge, but she is about to cry, and he doesn't let up. Rather than letting up, he increases the assault on her. This is, I read it as, a violent scene. Voldemort, said Harry furiously, and both Ron and Hermione winced, right? This is an assault. What's happening? What's he up to? Where is he? What are we doing to stop him? We've told you the Order doesn't let us in on their meetings, said Hermione nervously. We don't know the details, but we've got a general idea, she added hastily, seeing the look on Harry's face. What is the look on Harry's face that forces her to add hastily, so we don't know the details, but we've got a general idea? Like, what is the look on his face that forces Hermione Granger to be fearful in that moment? This is not the Harry Potter that we know and love. This is not the Harry Potter, thankfully, that we're going to get through the rest of the book. But this is where Harry is now. Let me scroll up with the yes, let me see here. Jackie is saying, Harry's not ready for a resolution, so he keeps spiraling. He's itching for a fight and enjoying the yelling. Yes, he absolutely is. And Elizabeth agrees. Oh, the chat scrolled. Excuse me. Elizabeth agrees and says he's probably already had this fight in his mind a dozen times and is thinking, what else did I want to yell about? Yes, I think so. But also, well, I don't know. Look, is it unfair of me to read this as Harry enjoying his dominance over his friends at this point, right? That he is exercising his power, that he is unleashing his power. This isn't just about setting right wrongs. This is, I mean, just textually, this is pretty close to his confrontation with Dudley, right? This is uncomfortably close, like wanting to hurt in words, if not in outright magic. Wanting to hurt is tough. It's really tough. Yeah. Okay, let's keep pushing on. Gosh, how many more slides do I have? I still have 3 more slides. I think we can get through those. Let's do this thing. Let's get to Percy, of course. Just a little subplot here. But what's that got to do with Percy? Asked Harry, confused. I'm coming to that. Oh, sorry, Ron. I'm coming to that. Dad reckons Fudge only wants Percy in his office because he wants to use him to spy on the family and Dumbledore. Harry let out a low whistle. Bet Percy loved Dad. Ron laughed in a hollow sort of way. He went completely berserk. He said loads of terrible stuff. He said he's been having a struggle against Dad's lousy reputation ever since he joined the ministry, and that Dad's got no ambition, and that's why we've always been, not had a lot of money, I mean. What? Said Harry in disbelief as Ginny made a noise like an angry cat. I know, said Ron in a low voice. And it got worse. He said Dad was an idiot to run around with Dumbledore, that Dumbledore was heading for big trouble and Dad was going to go down with him, and that he, Percy, knew where his loyalty lay, and it was with the ministry. And if Mum and Dad were going to become traitors to the ministry, he was going to make sure everyone knew he didn't belong to our family anymore. He packed his bags that same night and left. He's living here in London now. Harry swore under his breath. He'd always liked Percy least of Ron's brothers, but he'd never imagined he would say such things to Mr. Weasley. Mum's been in a right state, said Ron, crying and stuff. She came up to London to try and talk to Percy, but he slammed the door in her face. I don't know what he does if he meets Dad at work. Ignores him, I suppose. But Percy must know Voldemort's back, said Harry slowly. He's not stupid. He must know your mum and Dad wouldn't risk everything without proof. Yeah, well, your name got dragged into the row, said Ron, shooting Harry a furtive look. Percy said the only evidence was your word, and I don't know. He didn't think it was good enough. As Joseph says, Percy saying the quiet part out loud. This is heartbreaking, you guys. I know we moved past it pretty quick, and I know that it is by no means the most significant subplot of this book. And I know that Percy Weasley is not even the worst character that we're going to have to deal with in the course of this book. But damn, Percy Weasley, what the hell? How could... It's bad enough. It's bad enough that Percy could even conceive of thoughts like that. It is worse still that he can articulate thoughts like that. It is worse still. It is the worst thing that he can articulate thoughts like that to Arthur and Molly Weasley. Praised be their names, beloved of these parishes. Arthur and Molly Weasley, just the best wizard mum and wizard dad that there have ever been. Gandalf excluded for obvious reasons. This is heartbreaking. It's absolutely vile and very purposeful, right? This is, well, we don't get to Dolores Umbridge and we don't get to the ministry without this, or rather, we could, but what we are doing here is laying track for that ultimate revelation. This is a personal betrayal that anchors and illuminates a systematic betrayal, an institutionalized betrayal. Of course, we're going to get the opportunity to, again, not the opportunity, can't keep using that word. We're going to have the grim duty to talk about Dolores Umbridge in just a couple of weeks' time. And when we do, of course, we're going to be looking objectively and more clearly at the Ministry than we have before in the pages of Harry Potter. But let's be clear, Dolores Umbridge does not come out of nowhere. Percy Weasley's utter rank cowardice and failure of loyalty here, right? His Slytherin tendencies, his anti-Hufflepuff tendencies here are not emerging into the text ex nihilo, right? They are emerging from established understandings that we have built up over the course of the last 2 books. This goes all the way back to Prisoner of Azkaban. This goes back arguably to Chamber of Secrets, right? To the imprisonment of Hagrid in Azkaban at the command of Cornelius Fudge back in Chamber of Secrets. I don't think that beat, by the way, in the context of Chamber of Secrets is intended to cast doubt on the Ministry in the way that it does end up casting doubt on the Ministry, but it is a brilliant bit of prescience from J.K. Rowling. If she didn't know where that side of the story was going at the time that she wrote that, then it was incredibly fortuitous. If she did know, then she architected that beautifully, just gorgeously. So all the way from the end of Chamber, through Prisoner of Azkaban, through Goblet of Fire, and now here we are. Now lines are actually being drawn, and this is just vile. And the humanity with which Ron explores this topic, the humanity with which Ron expresses himself here, the way that he falters, it's just gorgeous. He said he's been having to struggle against Dad's lousy reputation ever since he joined the Ministry, and that Dad's got no ambition, and that's why we've always been, not had a lot of money. I mean, what? Said Harry in disbelief, and Ginny made a noise like an angry cat. Raise a glass to Ginny Weasley. You guys, making a noise like an angry cat is maybe the perfect response. I mean, in the absence of outright profanity inscribed upon the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, I might just go back and append a little post-it note there where Ginny just utters like a good solid 4-letter Anglo-Saxon word at that point and would be completely justified in doing so, let me tell you. And it got worse, says Ron. He said Dad was an idiot to run around with Dumbledore, that Dumbledore was heading for big trouble and Dad was going to go down with him, and that he, Percy, knew where his loyalty lay and it was with the Ministry. The way that language is fragmented, the way that Ron is kind of folding back in on himself, the inelegant repetition of Dumbledore, run around with Dumbledore, that Dumbledore was heading for big trouble, that Dad was going to go down with him, and that he, Percy, offset in M dash is there because Ron is aware that the story is kind of getting away from him. This is gorgeously written dialogue. All of the dialogue in this sequence, Ron and Hermione's dialogue in the sequence is gorgeously written. I do find Harry's to be a little overblown, right? I'm supposed, to the degree that I am justifying Harry's attributed dialogue and Harry's behavior through the first part of Order of the Phoenix, I am trying to indicate that he is carrying a much more urgent and atypical emotional load than we might expect at this point. But yeah, some of his dialogue is a little tough on the ears, is a little tough on the eyes, as we're reading Becca pointing out, Ginny is a good girl. And then it scrolled, sorry. Ginny is a good girl, at least the Weasleys still have the good children. And C-Star says, I often make that angry cat hiss when upset. And I hope, C-Star, that you make that angry cat hiss when you think of Percy Weasley. Right, let me see, 2 more slides. Let's get to the Daily Prophet here. It's quite nasty, actually, said Hermione in a voice of forced calm. They're just building on Rita's stuff. But she's not writing for them anymore, is she? Oh, no, she kept her promise. Not that she's got any choice, Hermione added with satisfaction. But she laid the foundation for what they're trying to do now. Which is what? Said Harry impatiently. Okay, she wrote that you were collapsing all over the place and saying your scar was hurting and all that? Yeah, said Harry, who was not likely to forget Rita Skeeter's story about him in a hurry. Well, they're writing about you as though you're this deluded, attention-seeking person who thinks he's a great tragic hero or something, said Hermione very fast, as though it would be less unpleasant for Harry to hear these facts quickly. They keep slipping in snide comments about you. If some far-fetched story appears, that they say something like, a tale worthy of Harry Potter. And if anyone has a funny accident or anything, it's, let's hope he hasn't got a scar on his forehead or we'll be asked to worship him next. I don't want anyone to worship, Harry began hotly. I know you don't, said Hermione quickly, looking frightened. I know, Harry. But do you see what they're doing? They want to turn you into someone no one will believe. Fudge is behind it, I'll bet anything. They want wizards on the street to think you're just some stupid boy who's a bit of a joke who tells ridiculous tall stories because he loves being famous and wants to keep it going. I didn't ask. I didn't want. Voldemort killed my parents, Harry spluttered. I got famous because he murdered my family and couldn't kill me. Who wants to be famous for that? Don't they think I'd rather it had never... We know, Harry, said Ginny earnestly. We'll call out, said Hermione quickly, looking frightened. And we know, Harry, said Ginny earnestly. Hermione and Ginny. Well, in this slide, This slide comes off as unfortunately gendered. I apologize for that. Of course, Ron is also doing some of the emotional heavy lifting in the course of the scene. But yes, here we get both Hermione and Ginny, our token girls in this scene, managing Harry's emotional state, kind of hoping to prevent another outburst from Harry, even though he is, again, somewhat excessive. This is somewhat justified too. But this is more than just a bit of this is more than just a slanderous assault on Harry's character, right? A libelous assault? Which one is spoken and which one is written? I can never keep those two straight. This is an assault on Harry's character, right? This is, as Hermione completely accurately reads here, an attempt to discredit him. This is good. Thank you, Wilhelm. Libel is written. So this is a libelous assault on Harry Potter. I'm sure there is some slanderous assault on Harry Potter too happening out there in the streets of the Wizarding World, but still, yes, this is the Daily Prophet's libelous assault on Harry Potter, seeking to discredit him as an authority, seeking to discredit him as a figure of influence within the Wizarding World. This is classic, again, Machiavellian politics, right? This is how sophisticated J.K. Rowling's take on the Wizarding World has become following the transition out of the Goblet of Fire, which is narratively sophisticated, but in terms of its world building, still fairly simplistic, right? We've talked about how thin the Triwizard Tournament is, but here in Order of the Phoenix, oh no, we are doing something way more subtle, way more sophisticated, way more adult, way more mature, but this is more than just a hatchet job on Harry's character. Because this is cleaving right to the core of Harry Potter, the series. We have spent the last 62 and a half episodes, 62 and 9/10 episodes of Dear Mr. Potter, talking about Harry's exceptionalism, talking about what it is that makes Harry a hero. Why is Harry different? Why is he standing outside, even when he is integrated with his community? Why is he the ego in this, ethos, logos, pathos, triplicate structure that we have here? Why is he the protagonist of the story? Why is he an exceptional hero? What defines Harry? What binds Harry? What bounds Harry within the frame of the Wizarding World? Well, the Daily Prophet is taking a shot at that, at Harry's exceptionalism. It is as though the Daily Prophet is aware of the preceding 4 books. Oh, Harry Potter, yeah, the international literary phenomenon, yeah, let's take a shot at him. Let's take him down a peg or two. He is dangerous right now. And as Hermione argues, fudge is behind it, I'll bet anything. We'll get back to that too. Okay, we've got just a second here. Yes, Marshall saying, and again, the terrifying prescience of J.K.'s writing rears its head. A media agency functioning as a fear-mongering propaganda arm for the corrupt government? Could this be relevant 15 years after this book's publication? Yeah, did I start? I intended to start last week's show by saying that the original title of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix was Harry Potter and the Terrifyingly Prescient Political Allegory. And yes, for reasons like this and many more to come, yes, this book has never been more relevant. This book has never been more important, particularly for a YA audience, particularly for an audience that, well, quite frankly, we're going to rely upon to save the world, right? Hey, sorry, Generation Z, do we have a name for you yet? Do we have a name for the post-millennial generation? Hey, whoever you are, we're relying on you to save the world. So step up. Good luck. We'll be cheering for you from the sidelines. Yeah. That I'm being wildly disingenuous there. It is, of course, the responsibility of everyone of good spirit and good heart to save the world when the world needs saving. God knows in 2018 the world needs saving. So the Daily Prophet, this hatchet job, yeah, we're seeing the influence of propaganda. Again, we're going to have the opportunity to delve more powerfully into this propagandistic tool from the ministry, the use of propaganda in general in the Wizarding World, of course, already partially established as we've been pushing back against this notion of he who must not be named, or you know who, right? Using his name is very important. Robbing him of that mythic power is very important. Harry is still pushing back against that, though we're going to have some conversations about that in the very near future. Okay, let's do one more slide. Let's wrap this thing up. We have the whole thing about the eavesdropping. We have this brilliant notion, this wonderful image of Ginny sitting at the top of the stairs lobbing dung bombs at the kitchen door, trying to see if it's been warded off against intrusion. I love Ginny Weasley, you guys. She's just a star. And yeah, any sequence, any reading that gives me both Ginny and Tonks is going to make me very happy. In a couple of weeks, we're going to get to Luna Lovegood too. The moth-eaten velvet curtains Harry had passed earlier had flown apart, but there was no door behind them. For a split second, Harry thought he was looking through a window behind which an old woman in a black cap was screaming and screaming as though she was being tortured. Then he realized it was simply a life-size portrait, but the most realistic and the most unpleasant he had ever seen in his life. The old woman was drooling. Her eyes were rolling. The yellowing skin of her face stretched taut as she screamed, and all along the hall behind him the other portraits awoke and began to yell too, so that Harry actually screwed up his eyes at the noise and clapped his hands over his ears. Lupin and Mrs. Weasley darted forward and tried to tug the curtains shut over the old woman, but they would not close, and she screeched louder than ever, brandishing clawed hands as though trying to tear at their faces. Filth! Scum! Byproducts of dirt and vileness! Half-breeds, mutants, freaks, be gone from this place! How dare you befoul the house of my fathers! Tonks apologized over and over again, at the same time dragging the huge, heavy troll's leg back off the floor. Mrs. Weasley abandoned the attempt to close the curtains and hurried up and down the hall, stunning all the other portraits with her wand. Then a man with long black hair came charging out of a door facing Harry. "Shut up, you horrible old hag! Shut up!" he roared, seizing the curtain Mrs. Weasley had abandoned. The old woman's face blanched. "You!" she howled, her eyes popping at the sight of the man. "Blood, traitor! Abomination! Shame of my flesh!" "I said shut up!" roared the man, and with stupendous effort he and Lupin managed to force the curtains closed again. The old woman's screeches died, and an echoing silence fell. Panting slightly and sweeping his long dark hair out of his eyes, Harry's godfather, Sirius, turned to face him. "Hello, Harry," he said grimly. "I see you've met my mother." And as far as chapter conclusions go, you guys, that's one of my favorites. That's a pretty solid beat, upon which to end this. Oh, James Broken Hero saying, "I feel that they should just like reducto that portrait. That's pretty good. I like that quite a lot. Yes, good." And Becca saying, "Molly is literally shutting the door on racism. I love her." Austin Jefford saying, "I could see a swastika somewhere in there as well." Yeah, I mean, as Marshall, yes, Marshall is saying a Confederate flag would not be remotely out of place in Grimmauld Place. Yeah. Pretty gross, pretty tough. There are going to be some difficult discussions that we're going to have in the context of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, of course, but also let us remember hope. Let us remember light. Let us remember defiance. Let us remember unity. Let us remember love and friendship and the things that keep us fighting. Let us remember Dumbledore's army, right? We're going to get to that in due course, and we're going to see what happens when tyranny tries to descend upon a world of people who will not take it lying down, basically. And we'll get to all of that in the weeks to come. It is not going to be just a heartbreaking, morose march to the end of this book, I promise you. Let's take a very quick look at I made it through all my slides. Hey, look at that. 2 weeks in a row, all my slides. It's like I'm practiced at this. It's like I'm a pro at this or something. Next session, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, chapters 5 and 6, the Order of the Phoenix and the noble and most ancient House of Black. We will get to those at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central next Tuesday, which, believe it or not, is July the 31st. Someone has stolen away July from me, you guys, and I don't know where it's gone, but if you've seen it, can you please return it to me? Because I could really do with those extra weeks. I could really do with a little more, July, basically, is what it comes down to. So next week, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, that is Tuesday, July the 31st, for Dear Mr. Potter 64, chapters 5 and 6 of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Let me close that video and come back to you here. Here we go. Let's see if we can do a very quick rush through some questions, since we're already out of time. Kulu asks, "And there and back again, you stated that Tolkien's lack of female characters does not mean that he does not respect women because he makes the few female characters competent or interesting. However, you criticize J.K. Rowling for her lack of people of color characters, even though all those mentioned are interesting or competent. To me, that seems like a double standard. I dislike both, but truly find Tolkien's utter lack of females much more systematic and off-putting. How do you rationalize these different treatments?" I don't think, I was aware even last week, as we were discussing this in the conclusion of last week's session, that I wasn't being specific enough in my language, so thank you, Kula, for the opportunity to kind of be a little more careful about this. I don't... Okay, step the first. Yes, I want all stories to be more representative. Yes, I want more diversity in all my stories, in all my fiction forever. Please and thank you. That would be great. I don't, however, generally want to go back and unpick existing stories or criticize those stories in a way that is in any way disingenuous, right? Would I like there to be more people of color in the works of J.K. Rowling? Yes, I would. Would I like there to be more women in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien? Yes, I would. Yes, like emphatically, yes, I would. Are these books weaker for the absence? Well, perhaps in a grand philosophical kind of sense, but I don't think that they stop either work from being fantastic, from being important, from being significant. And I know that when I was talking about people of color and representation in general in the works of JKR, and this also ties into this notion of fat shaming in JKR, right? Some of the slightly or outright politically dubious things that JKR has done in the course of the Harry Potter series. When I'm talking about that, or when I was talking about that last week, I really was thinking more in terms of future adaptations of this work. I was thinking more about what we can do with the heart of the story and what parts of this story are anchored in actual specific notions of identity, right? Like Harry's specific experience as a white boy, a white middle class English boy in the suburbs, right? That is actually key to Harry's experience. That is absolutely key to Harry's experience. Ron's ethnic identity, certainly much less so. Ron's gender, actually very important, I would argue. I don't think you can casually gender flip Ron Weasley. I think that by casually gender flipping Ron Weasley, you would necessarily force a change in the underpinnings, of his character, because so much of Ron's character is about that boisterous masculine relationship with his elder brothers, with his father. Right? There's a lot of masculinity and a lot of perspectives on masculinity contained within Ron's character. Could you gender flip Hermione Granger? No, I don't think that you could either, actually. I think that there are too many assumptions about, there are too many dependencies on Hermione's gender in terms of her arc, in terms of her story. But I'm getting away from the point here. That is not to say that I don't think that you can do some really interesting things with ethnicity, that I don't think. It's just when you change these characteristics, right? If a character is genuinely... if a character exists genuinely independently of gender, of race, of any other kind of like defining characteristic of that character, then that character probably isn't a terribly good character in the first place. Your characters should always spring from their terroir. Your characters should always be informed by the kind of characters that they are, and you should be saying something about the kind of characters that they are. Thus, when you change the kind of characters that they are, you are necessarily changing their backstory. That is, to be clear, a thing that you can do and a thing that we ought to do if we genuinely believe that diversity and representation and inclusivity are important goals to work toward. I do. I think that we all agree on that score. Do I lambast JKR unfairly for her depiction or for her use and her utilization for her inclusion of people of color when I don't take Professor Tolkien to similar task for his excision of women? Yeah, maybe. Honestly, yes, maybe. That may be the case. I will need to think more about that. I do generally think that though Professor Tolkien includes very few female characters, and I think I spoke about this much more freely back when I was talking about The Hobbit rather than The Lord of the Rings, because of course The Lord of the Rings, at least, has some female characters, that is. It is true, I think, that all of the prominent female characters in The Lord of the Rings are among the most powerful and most important characters that we get in the entire schema, with, minor exceptions, I suppose. Maybe Rosie Cotton isn't that important for like the future of Middle-earth, but she's pretty important to my heart and to Samwise Gamgee. But you're looking at Galadriel, and you're looking at Arwen, and you're looking at Éowyn. These are very, very significant characters who absolutely stand. And also, of course, the way that Tolkien addresses those characters and speaks to those characters. If you haven't caught up with There and Back Again, you haven't heard me talk about Faramir and Éowyn in the Houses of Healing back in the middle of Book 6 of The Return of the King, then please go and listen to that discussion. I like that discussion very much, and I think there might be something in there. But do I take JKR to task in a way that I don't take J.R.R. Tolkien to task? Maybe. I will have to think about that. And if you guys have extra perspectives on that, then please get in touch and let me know. You can always email pointnorthmedia@gmail.com, or you can head on over to the forum, pointnorthmedia.com/forumkulu. Thank you very much for that question. Let me see. Stephanie asking, do we think a muggle reading Dumbledore's note would be able to see 12 Grimmauld Place? Yes. Yes, I have been thinking about this a lot, Stephanie. This is such an interesting question, because this ties back to the discussion that we had last week about Petunia Dursley, and to a lesser extent, or in a more complicated way, about Arabella Figg too, right? Squibs exist. Arabella Figg, Argus Filch, these characters exist. They cannot wield magic. They cannot cast magic. They are rendered magical simply by their knowledge of the wizarding world. The same, therefore, could be said of Aunt Petunia, and to a much lesser extent, I suppose, Vernon Dursley, Dudley Dursley too, right? Any muggle that comes in contact with wizards is kind of contaminated, right? There is like a Gnostic quality to this association with the wizarding world. If a muggle is allowed to apprehend the secret of the Order of the Phoenix, or the secret of 12 Grimmauld Place in particular, would they be able to see it? I think so. I think that they would. I don't know if there are additional protections layered into that little message, if there are particular, if there are other enchantments layered over layered over 12 Grimmauld Place, layered over this kind of magic, there may well be, right? That might be a hand wave that JKR can provide us over on Pottermore in a couple of years' time when this question makes it to the top of her question bucket. But yes, my read would be yes. And I think that that's one of the reasons that Moody burns the paper after Harry has read it, of course. That's why he ignites the paper, because you just wouldn't want those, being left laying around for muggles to find, I guess. But yes, that would be my answer. I have more thoughts on squibs and on what distinguishes wizards in the broader sense, members of the wizarding world and the wizarding community from muggles. It really is about that ignorance. It isn't about magic. Clearly it isn't about magic, right? No one would assert that Argus Filch was a muggle. No one would assert that he doesn't belong in the wizarding world. The same can be said of Arabella Figg too, obviously, and the other squibs as well. Therefore, the only characteristic that we can use to define muggles with any kind of care is ignorance of the wizarding world. And if ignorance of the wizarding world is the definitive quality of muggles, then we are left with the shocking understanding and realization that, in fact, the Dursleys are not muggles at all, which has a kind of poetic irony to it that I really, really enjoy. So, perhaps more on that later. Perhaps more on that when the wizarding world continues to crash into the muggle world in the course of the next few books. Middlemara says, Middlemara, we're going to have an opportunity to talk about this in the future because Hermione's relationship with her family is wild. But yeah, how do you feel about the fact Hermione spends little to no time with her family as an early teen? It just seems strange that she goes to boarding school and spends the entire summer with the Weasleys. I mean, I don't want to be too casual about this. I do think that it is possible to read this as almost as a heartwarming story of belonging and community, that in a powerful sense, Hermione does not belong with her parents. She does, we've had this discourse on where Harry belongs in the course of Order of the Phoenix, in the course of the series as a whole, of course, but it's been very specifically called out over the course of the last few chapters. We've commented on that several times, and Hermione does not belong in the Muggle world. Hermione doesn't have even the passing connection to the Muggle world that Harry has. Harry is still to a certain degree, caught between two worlds. He doesn't have the knowledge of the wizarding world that Hermione Granger has, which prevents him from integrating properly into the wizarding world. This is the quiet tragedy of the protagonist of our story, of course, because he is the reader avatar character. It's very unusual to have like an exceptional hero of quite this sort fulfilling the role of the reader surrogate within the frame of a fantasy novel, but Harry is doing exactly that. He doesn't know what Hermione knows. He hasn't studied what Hermione has studied. Therefore, he cannot integrate into the wizarding world in the way that Hermione has integrated into the wizarding world. What is for Hermione in the Muggle world? I mean, her parents, yes. We'll talk more about that in the future. Yeah, is it sad? Am I saddened by it? Yeah, I mean, it's certainly bittersweet, right? I think that there is a sweetness that she has been so fully adopted by her new community, by her found family, right? The Weasleys, with the minor exception of Molly Weasley believing that Hermione's something of a Scarlet Woman back in the pages of Goblet of Fire. With that exception qualified, I think that it is actually quite lovely that Hermione has found a home with the Weasleys. But yeah, it is also heartbreaking that she's separated from her parents. And I wonder how her parents feel about that, right? Hermione's parents are one of the great unanswered questions of the entire Harry Potter series. I know that we get references and, of course, a great tragic twist at the end, which is somewhat undone after the fact. But still, I think that Hermione's parents are a rich area for speculation, but we're speculating on very little information here too. Yeah. Great question though. Thank you for that. Let me see. Austin asks, is Percy taking of the ministry line and the dismissal of his parents and a guy he's known for years, does it fit in with his Gryffindor-ness? No. Nope. It is, okay. Let's try and not fall into the trap of, well, no, because the Gryffindors are the good guys. No. What is distinctive about the Gryffindor kids? Courage, bravery, stalwartness, right? Like those are that is the sole characteristic that we associate with Gryffindor. Courage. Percy is not exhibiting courage here. He is not exhibiting even his argument about loyalty, which we could accept as a Hufflepuff argument for if Percy is as Ron is, right, a Hufflepuff in Gryffindor's clothing, even if we wanted to accept that, it doesn't seem to stand. It doesn't seem to hold up. We get that great sarcastic line, right? I actually quoted this because I wanted to do it. This is from that discussion. Though he had known perfectly well that Percy was highly ambitious, Harry's impression was that Percy had not made a great success of his first job at the Ministry of Magic. Percy had committed the fairly large oversight of failing to notice that his boss was being controlled by Lord Voldemort. Brilliant, sassy Harry, right? I'm super into that. No, this is an outright Slytherin tactic, right? This is ambition at the expense of all else, because it's not just about loyalty to the Ministry, right? If Percy was making, right, the Gryffindor argument here, if you like, or even like a possible Hufflepuff argument, even a possible passable Ravenclaw argument for sticking with the Ministry and turning on his family is Voldemort is back. We're about to throw down. Like, there is going to be another Wizarding War. We need unity. We need strength. We need power. He would be wrong, but at least he would be principled. Percy Weasley is not principled here. He is not right here. This is about his own ambition. When he's talking about the standout reference there to Arthur's lack of ambition and to the fact that he feels ashamed of his father in the context of the Ministry. No, this is not a Gryffindor act. This is a Slytherin act. And what that does to our understanding of the Sorting Hat, I have no idea, right? Like, this is a very specific point of data that we might use to speculate. And of course, we're not done with Percy yet. Let's not, we don't want to jump ahead too much to what happens with Percy, but we'll get a different kind of Percy later in the series. Yeah, good. And that is it. Those are our questions. I'm almost out of time in a very emphatic way. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for your presence here this evening. I hope you have all enjoyed yourselves as much as I have enjoyed myself. As I say, next week we'll be back for chapters 5 and 6 of The Order of the Phoenix, The Order of the Phoenix itself, and the noble and most ancient House of Black. We're going to get a lot of chance to talk about Sirius next week, which I'm really looking forward to, and more of this wild and enthusiastic and vast, ambitious expansion of our understanding of Harry's wizarding world, but also some really great and tangible, connective and integrated world building. Next week's chapters are going to be really fun, and in fact, our next few weeks of readings are going to be really super fun, so I hope that you'll be able to join me for all of those. Thank you in particular to everyone who joined us for the first time tonight, to Barry and to Kaylee and to Julia and to Dr. Gallifrey. I hope you all had a wonderful time. I hope you all managed to stick it out to the end. Guys, I will talk to you all again next week. Until then, take care. Mischief